begin. Just for the record, we will no longer take people asking questions in virtual format, so people will be here in person, and we will take people in order of arrival for questions. This is really a pivotal moment for the prosperity and security of the United States and democracies around the world. At the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, which is also meeting right now, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley are discussing resources needed to meet the military challenges from Russia, China, and others around the world. But the agencies that are represented here, that each of you represent, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and the National Science Foundation, NSF, are also key to standing up to the challenges facing our country. So it gives me great pleasure this morning to welcome NASA Administrator Bill Nelson and NSF Director. I'm going to call you Dr. Ponch for ease of statement. So thank you both for being here this morning. It's really good to see you again, and I'm delighted that our ranking member has joined us. Just to clarify again for the record, we have about 4 hearings going on in the Senate this morning, so we are not sure who will be able to attend, but Senator Moran and I know, have lots of questions, so we will be able to cover so many issues that are going to be important as we look at the appropriations process. The programs that each of you manage are on the front lines of bolstering the nation's cybersecurity, training teachers, technicians, explorers, and entrepreneurs, developing industries of the future, and understanding the existential threat of climate change. This subcommittee wants the next pair of boots on the moon, the next Nobel Prize-winning discovery, and the next paradigm-changing technology company to be made in the USA. Or from my perspective, better yet, the Granite State. I'm sure Senator Moran feels that way about his home state of Kansas. We know in New Hampshire that manufacturers have what it takes to cut it in space. We have local companies like Microlar, a contractor for NASA, who is a continued contributor of technology and supplies to NASA programs. But we can't take our continued leadership for granted. Our global competitors, including China, especially China, are investing heavily in scientific and technological innovation. And if we want to sustain our scientific leadership and the economic prosperity and national security that it affords, we have to continue to keep peace. When the U.S. government was shut down in 2019 due to partisan bickering, a disagreement in the Senate over the budget, China was landing on the dark side of the moon. We're not going to be able to compete if that's the choice that we have. Now, I don't want to focus on the past, but we need to learn from it so that we don't repeat it. Most critical, it's a reminder of what's at stake in this global competition. That's why I'm pleased that the fiscal year 2022 omnibus provided the largest increase to NSF in more than a decade and a $770 million increase for NASA. I'm also pleased that Congress is currently in the midst of a bipartisan conference on significant legislation to advance the mission of both these agencies, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which is the name of the Senate version of the bill. President Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget for NASA and NSF build on this progress and keep the nation moving in the right direction. For NASA, the FY 2023 request is nearly $26 billion, an increase of $1.9 billion, or 8% above the FY 22 enacted level. The President's request includes $10.5 billion for NSF. This is an increase of $1.65 billion, or 19% above the FY 22 enacted level. There's a lot to like in these requests. I'm sure that each of you would have liked more, but I think this is an increase that can be put to good use, and I know that both agencies plan to expand climate research. NASA is asking for $2.4 billion in earth science research and more than $500 million to lessen the impact of aviation on the climate. NSF's budget includes a total of $1.55 billion for climate and clean energy research as we work to enhance our energy security and create energy efficiency and renewable energy jobs. Most important, the request invests in people, with $150 million for STEM engagement at NASA and $1.4 billion for NSF's renamed Directorate for STEM Education. And this is a major priority for me because I've seen how critical it is to our economy in New Hampshire and to the economy in the country. I was just at a ribbon cutting yesterday for BAE Systems, which makes critical parts for the F-35 and a lot of our warfighting equipment. And they're hoping to hire several hundred more jobs in New Hampshire. And when I asked them, what's your biggest challenge? It was workforce. It was finding those STEM educated workers who can come in and do the jobs, the engineers, the scientists that they need. And so the work that you're doing in that area, both NASA and NSF, is really critical. This is, of course, a point of pride for New Hampshire as well because of we're the home of the Krista McAuliffe and Alan Shepard, who are both revered Granite Staters and emblems of STEM education. The same sentiment is shared by our academic institutions that are highly respected around the country for their aerospace research and innovation. And as we were discussing, Senator Administrator Nelson, we're immensely proud of the University of New Hampshire Space Science Center, which was recently selected by NASA to research the Earth-Sun environment. As one of the 2 winners of the Heliophysics Medium Class Explorer competition, the $250 million will improve our understanding of the dynamics of the sun, its connection to the Earth, and the universe. NASA's budget request will land the next humans on the moon and return soil samples from Mars, while NSF seeks to create jobs and maintain U.S. leadership on critical technologies that will define the next several decades. Technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing through the new Directorate of Technology, Innovations, and Partnership, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that in your testimony. There are also a few challenging items in these requests. In particular, I'm concerned with the proposed cuts to NASA Heliophysics and an overall lack of resources to address recent decadal surveys in astrophysics and planetary science at both agencies. So in conclusion, I believe that we must continue to look toward the next frontiers of science and space, and I'm looking forward to the launch of Artemis 1 this summer. I understand that Senator Moran is also looking forward to that. I support NASA and NSF because these agencies inspire us with curiosity-driven research and exploration, and I think curiosity is one of the most important aspects of the human condition. So we thank you, both of you, for what you do to answer questions that we want to know about. So with that, let me recognize the Vice Chair and one of the conferees of the United States Innovation and Competition Act, Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. I appreciate hearing your enthusiasm. You and I are involved in a lot of hearings on this subcommittee and others, and I would hate to admit that that any of them are ones that I'm not excited about being at. But if there's a level of enthusiasm for a subject for a hearing, it is this one. And it's nice to have the 2 of you here today together. And I certainly welcome our former colleague and Administrator Nelson and Director Panchanathan to this hearing. I want to start by thanking Panch for visiting Kansas with me last year. It was a highlight and very valuable, certainly to me, and I hope to you, but to the people, the students that we spent and you spent time with, and I'm very grateful for that. And Senator Nelson, you are relentless, maybe an overstatement, but not far, relentless in your willingness, stated willingness to come to Kansas, and it seems to be my schedule that is keeping that from happening, and I'm going to make it happen shortly, and I thank you for that. There is great value in Americans seeing the 2 of you, hearing what you're about, your mission, and generating the enthusiasm in them. It's helpful to us as we appropriate money for our constituents to believe that that money is being wisely spent and of value to the country. The proposed budget for NASA is $26 billion. It's an increase of about 8%. NSF's proposed budget is $10.5 billion and represents an almost 19% increase. I am pleased to be a conferee on USICA, and I hope that we have success in reaching an agreement so that that legislation can become law. NASA is one of the most well-known government agencies. In the past year, we've witnessed the successful launch of the James Webb Telescope, and I appreciate your efforts, Administrator, to see that I and 4 of my colleagues were present. We didn't quite succeed. It all worked on the 20th of December. It worked on the 22nd of December. It may have worked on the 24th of December, but when it was Christmas morning, most of our families had other plans for us on that day. But in addition to the James Webb Telescope, it was a year of research and science on Mars, from Perseverance and Ingenuity, and we are eagerly awaiting Artemis I launch that signifies our first step toward returning American astronauts, and in this case, a woman to the moon. I've been the lead Republican on this committee since the early days of the Artemis program and worked closely with the previous administrator to identify challenges ahead on what was needed to ensure the long-term success of Artemis missions. Returning to the moon and sustaining a presence there is a long-term goal for our nation, and I'm pleased that this administration is continuing that goal. NSF's scientific research is no less impressive. In Kansas alone, you can go from a lab studying plant genomics to studying Arctic and Antarctic ice without leaving the state and even without leaving the campus. We cannot rest upon our past successes, however. There is significant competition across the globe to be the nation that unlocks the knowledge and discoveries that will drive economic growth and success. This research is important to our national security as well. We see that competition is focused from investments by other nations, but also from incentivizing the unlawful transfer of intellectual property. This is a recognition of the power of knowledge. It is important we are able to harness that power, knowledge, and inspirations generated by your agencies for the good of our country. NASA and NSF have the opportunities to capitalize on their missions to encourage students, young people across the country, no matter where they live, to pursue activities and careers in STEM. We just had a former astronaut in Kansas at the Kansas Cosmosphere, and we visited with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, hugely of value. They had no interest in me, but were very excited about the astronaut. Our country needs a workforce in each and every state that's ready to push to the frontiers of knowledge and has the skills to thrive in a tech-intensive economy. Great opportunities within your agencies to maintain our leadership across the scientific spectrum, on Earth and in space, if we are strategic in our investments. We're at a time where there is severe unrest in the world. Russia and China continue to make significant gains in the space domain. It's vital the United States maintain our leadership in space and in research and development, and I look forward to discussing the importance of this and the details of your proposed budgets being presented with us today. I thank you both for your leadership.
Thank you very much, Senator Moran. Senator Nelson, and then Dr. Punch, do you want to give us your testimony?
Thank you, ma'am. And Madam Chair, if I may have my remarks submitted for the record, and I'd like to just talk to you, if I may. First of all, I want to thank you all for the appropriations for 2022, and that gave us what we needed. And a little birdie told me that you all are seriously considering getting the appropriations bills out for 2023 before October the 1st. And if you do, that will be a minor miracle. All of you will become Merlin the magician, and but I do believe that that is being seriously discussed among the leadership, and my compliments to Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell that those serious discussions, as well as the chairs and the ranking of appropriations, are occurring. and I hope it does. It will bring about certainty for all agencies of government if that, in fact, happens and breaks what has become a routine procedure where we often wait half, at least, of a fiscal year before getting the appropriations and going on a continuing resolution of previous appropriations, which often don't have any application to the present. So I commend you. I want you to know, just to pick up on comments that both of you made about STEM and about kids. I have been just blown away by our interns. We have lots of interns, and we love our interns. And 30% of our interns end up coming to work for NASA, and we are going to expand our interns. They are reflective of what the two of you just related about seeing students in school, that when the subject of space comes up, their little eyes light up, they get excited, they're motivated. It's a subject matter of which it's a window into the items that are absolutely critical for the future of the country: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We saw a bit of this several generations ago in the Apollo generation, for when that major thrust of a space achievement occurred, for 2 generations of students, we saw the effects of a concentration on the STEM subject matter and how that rippled through the schools and the colleges and the universities and produced a workforce that gave us some of the technology that we are experiencing today. And that's what's going to happen with the Artemis generation. And you all, the two of you, have just testified to that fact by virtue of what you've seen. And it's extraordinary. We are taking it very seriously. We send our astronauts to a lot of schools. We send our scientists to a lot of schools. We are giving grants specifically in areas that have been overlooked in the past. This is part of our diversity outreach. So, for example, we've sent a space grant to the University of Wyoming. In the past, a lot of those rural universities didn't have a direct relation. But we don't want those students in rural areas, and that's just one example. We don't want them overlooked. They're part of the national culture that is so excited about space and technology and so forth. So I wanted to comment, since the two of you both mentioned it. You've given us the resources in which to proceed with the Artemis program. It was the Apollo generation. We're going back to the moon. We're going to land the first woman and the next man. It's going to be an exciting time. But this time we're going back to learn, to stay, to develop new systems, new technologies, new techniques on how to live a long time in that hostile environment, because when we go to Mars, we're going to have learned that. And we're going to have to learn new technologies too. I want to urge you, as an Appropriations Committee, don't short sheet space technology, the R&D. We need that extra oomph in our research and development. And let me give you one example. For years, by the way, you, the Congress, has rescued us on the question of nuclear energy in space. As a matter of fact, not until this year were we able to get the Office of Management and Budget to agree to put, albeit a minor amount, it's a symbolic amount, for nuclear research for space, nuclear thermal and nuclear electric. Not only producing electricity, where, for example, on the surface of the moon, we're going to need a lot of electricity because if we find water, then we have rocket fuel. And we've got a mission going to land on the South Pole next year. It's going to dig around down into the moon's surface. And if there is water there, then we have that opportunity. So I want to commend you for how you have constantly supported nuclear thermal, nuclear electric, but I want to ask you to consider pouring on the juice because that nuclear propulsion would give us a way to get to Mars quicker. And if we can get to Mars quicker, then we don't have to stay there for a long, long time until the planet's realigned so that we can get back within a reasonable period of time. And so I could keep talking on and on. Aviation, something dear to Senator Moran. We're going to fly the first electric airplane this year. We're going to fly the first low sonic boom, supersonic future transport that can fly over populated areas with just a little rumble instead of that boom, boom that goes with the existing sonic boom. There's so many things. I'm going to wait for your questions. Both of you mentioned James Webb Space Telescope. My goodness, in 1 month, we're going to have the first pictures. And it's going to be from light that has traveled at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, traveled for 13.5 billion years. It will be the light in the infrared spectrum that is from the formation of the very first galaxy. Just think of the discoveries that we're going to have of this thing called the universe that is too big for me to even conceive it. Think of the questions we're going to answer, of which we don't even know what the questions are right now as a result of what we're going to learn. And so I'm going to stop there, Madam Chair. I want to hear from Dr. Paunch, who is well-known, well-respected in his scientific discovery, a partner for us, and I look forward to hearing from you all as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Paunch.
Thank you so much. It's truly a delight to testify with you. As you said, NASA is a great partner. Good morning, Chair Shaheen, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the subcommittee. It is truly an honor to appear with you again today to discuss President's FY23 budget request and the many ways in which the National Science Foundation is accelerating discovery and innovation, as I say, at speed and scale for the benefit of all Americans. I would like to start by thanking this committee for your continued support of NSF. Your leadership has been and will continue to be central to keeping the United States the global leader in science, engineering, and technology. For more than 70 years, NSF has been a catalyst for economic growth and job creation in the United States. You do not have to look hard to see the profound impact of the agency. The internet, 3D printing, smartphones, and the networks that power them, and even the CRISPR technologies that were foundational in the development of COVID tests and vaccines and disease-resistant crops are just a few examples of how NSF's investments have benefited every American. However, we currently face challenges to our scientific leadership. You both spoke about that. Other nations are seeking to replicate our success, our unique innovation ecosystem, and to control the future of critical technologies like AI and quantum information science. Our economic and national security depend on our ability to invest heavily in the technologies of today while making the discoveries that are the foundation for the technologies of tomorrow and the future. We must seed growth everywhere by building ecosystems of innovation in every region of our country, and we must harness our domestic talent across every demographic and geographic background to unlock the true potential of our workforce. The $10.5 billion FY23 budget request for NSF makes historic investments in each of these areas. First, the budget funds critical exploratory, curiosity-driven research that the chair you talked about, which is an engine of economic growth and the foundation for the industries of the future. The request includes $9.8 billion, an increase of $1.6 billion above the FY 2022 enacted level to support research across the spectrum of science, engineering, and technology, and STEM education. With this additional funding, NSF will continue to be the champion of fundamental research that is the bedrock of our future. Second, the budget invests nearly $1.4 billion, again you alluded to that, Madam Chair, in support of the scientists and engineers of today and tomorrow. There is tremendous untapped STEM talent across every demographic and socioeconomic group in every geographic region of our country. Every person needs access to quality STEM education opportunities from K-12 to community colleges and universities. And we must inspire and motivate the missing millions to participate in the nation's innovation enterprise. The FY23 request introduces a new program aimed at advancing the geography of innovation and engaging the missing millions. Since I spoke to you last, I'm delighted to announce this new program. This new program is called GRANTED, an acronym for Growing Research Access for Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. This will focus on breaking down barriers to competitiveness at underserved institutions within the nation's research enterprise. It will complement NSF's long-standing broadening participation programs and build lasting institutional capacity. Finally, the budget makes substantial investments in use-inspired, solutions-oriented research. This has been a critical part of NSF's mission and now must be scaled to meet this moment of intense global competition. With the support of administration and Congress, NSF has launched, and I talked about this last year and I'm delighted to say again, we have launched the first new directorate in more than 30 years. This new directorate of Technology, Innovation and Partnerships, or TIP, sits at the crossroads of exploratory, curiosity-driven research, use-inspired, solutions-oriented research, and translational research across all scientific and engineering disciplines. Significant resources are needed to ensure that TIP will have the transformative impacts it is designed to achieve. That is why the FY23 budget requests includes $880 million for this new directorate. TIP will leverage decades of NSF's investments in areas like artificial intelligence, expedite technology development and translation in emerging industries, and cultivate new education and entrepreneurial pathways. I'm also proud to announce that today we will be releasing the first new major funding opportunity through the TIP Directorate. The Regional Innovation Engines Program offers a unique opportunity to spur economic growth in regions that have not participated in the technology boom of the past few decades. Each engine will include partners from industry, academia, government, nonprofits, civil society, and communities of practice. These partnerships will stimulate the creation of technology-driven products and solutions to serve the corresponding regions and the nation's needs. In doing so, the NSF engines, as we call them, will stimulate economic growth, develop talent, and build centers of innovation across the country. The FY23 budget request additionally invests in the critical world-leading infrastructure including test beds, living laboratories, and prototyping platforms necessary to enable fundamental research. NSF also takes very seriously the need to safeguard taxpayer-funded research. NSF is playing a leading role in developing processes, training, and policies to ensure research security and integrity. We are committed to strong partnerships across the federal government, with academia, and with our like-minded international partners to uphold the values of openness, transparency, and reciprocity and research integrity that have made the global research environment so successful. I'm amazed every day by the ingenuity and the dedication of the NSF workforce and the incredible innovations NSF makes possible. During the pandemic, we saw no decrease in productivity. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And thanks to the support of the administration and Congress through the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, we have been able to support those in the research community most impacted by the pandemic. Again, I would like to thank each of you for your support of NSF. The FY23 request positions the agency to ensure U.S. leadership in science, engineering, and technology for decades to come, and I look forward to working with you to achieve that goal. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Moran.
Well, thank you both very much for your testimony. We will now enter 5-minute questioning rounds, and I will begin. Administrator Nelson, I think the whole world has been transfixed on Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine and what's happening there. And as part of what we've heard from the rhetoric coming out of Russia is the suggestion that they may no longer participate with us in the International Space Station, and they may look to China to partner on space activities. Can you talk about how concerned we should be about that, and whether you're hearing at NASA's level any chatter that they may actually be pulling out of our partnership there?
Madam Chair, they are not pulling out. In the last day or so, there are misleading headlines. If you read the articles, it says something else of comments that were made by people in Roscosmos, the Russian space agency. I want you to think about this issue in a historical context. In the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, a Soviet spacecraft and an American spacecraft rendezvoused and docked in space, and the crews lived together and worked together in space, led by General Tom Stafford and General Alexei Leonov. That personal friendship endured over the years, so much so when Alexei passed away a couple of years ago, who gave the eulogy at the funeral in Moscow? None other than General Tom Stafford. And that cooperation in civil space has continued to this day. First, there was a Russian space station. There was Mir. And the U.S. space program, Space Shuttle, docked with Mir. Then together we built the International Space Station. Theoretically, you can't operate the space station without both. The Russians have the propulsion, the attitude control. The U.S. has the electricity production. I see nothing in the very even-keeled professional relationship between the cosmonauts and the astronauts, between mission control in Moscow and Houston, in the training of Russian cosmonauts in America and the training of American astronauts in Moscow and Baikonur. I see nothing that has interrupted that professional relationship, no matter how awful Putin is conducting a war with such disastrous results in Ukraine.
Well, thank you. That's really nice to hear. And I have been encouraged by the reports that we've seen about recent cooperation between the cosmonauts and our astronauts. Can you also comment on China and what you're seeing with respect to China and Russia cooperating in space?
Now, China is completely a different experience for vis-a-vis the U.S. space program, because there has not been any transparency. They are very secretive. An example, they put up their space station, and the first stage of their rocket, they didn't save enough fuel so that they could have a controlled re-entry. This is about a year or two ago. And as a result, it was going to come down someplace. Fortunately, it came down in the Indian Ocean, but it could have come down somewhere in Europe. It could have come down in Saudi Arabia. And they were secretive about the coordinates of where it was going to come down. I have since talked to the Chinese ambassador, and he gave me the opening. He said, well, what could we do? I said, I'll give you an example of exactly what you could do to begin things. You, 50 years after us, have returned a sample from the moon. 50 years ago, we made our sample of the lunar soil and rocks available to the international scientific community. You could do the same. Thus far, they have not indicated anything. So it's been a very strained relationship with the Chinese space program. What is the extent of cooperation with Russia, between Russia and China? I'm simply not sure. China has made entreaties to Russia. Russia has flirted with China, and you remember Putin went to the opening of the Olympics as the guest of President Xi. But we don't know to what extent. We do know that because of the professional relationship and what I believe to be the intention of the Russian space program to continue with the space station, and now that we have gotten the White House approval of extending the space station until 2030, if you all appropriate the funds. And of course, what we want to do is continue it until we have a commercial space station and then deorbit an aging space station in 2031. But we see every reason that the Russians are going to continue on the space station for the immediate future. And of course, we personally hope that they will continue with us all the way to 2030.
Thank you very much. Senator Moran.
Chair, thank you very much. Administrator Nelson, given the amount of work that remains to be done with test flights and developing and testing a lander and space suits, what do you see as the largest technical threat to landing our astronauts on the moon by 2025?
First of all, you all have helped us so that that landing will occur, because there have been indications, and we hope that you will consider favorably the President's request to start competition in a human lander. Now, as it turned out, the first competition NASA simply did not have enough money to award for 2 landers. And by far the most economical of the 3 competitors was the one that was given the nod, SpaceX, for the first landing. That's a done contract. What we wanted to do, and what you all, the Congress, have made particularly clear to me through hearings all last year, and I happen to agree with you, is that you wanted competition for the ultimate lander. So on the basis of that, we have started the initial process, and if you deem it wise in giving us the appropriations, which the President has requested, then we will have a simultaneous competition excluding SpaceX, because they already have that under procurement law and can't participate in the next competition. The winner of that competition would have the opportunity, as SpaceX, to land an uncrewed lander first and then do the crewed landing. They would have that opportunity. And then we would have 2 landers somewhere in the 2027 timeframe, having both have already landed, to make the ultimate choice of the lander that would last for some period of time as the lander on the moon. That is a decision that you will have to make in this President's request. And I believe that that is the plan that can bring us all the value of competition. You get it done with that competitive spirit, you get it done cheaper, and that allows us to move away from what has been a plague on us in the past, which is a cost-plus contract, and move to an existing contractual price.
Thank you for your answer. Let me ask about aeronautics. You did mention that it has of great value to Kansas and the country. That portfolio includes everything from low sonic boom aircraft to developing advanced materials and technologies that lead us to a safer, cleaner, more fuel-efficient aircraft. You're asking for an increase of $90 million to further our understanding of aeronautics. That's a $972 million request. While NASA is involved in identifying and improving this research, there are great opportunities within the university research community to improve our understanding and develop aeronautic capabilities within the aviation sector. How does NASA intend to use its proposed budget, aeronautics budget, to build upon the strong university research capabilities that exist today to solve current and future aeronautical problems of tomorrow?
Well, for example, at Wichita State, they are working on composites. Here's the problem today with composites. You can do a airliner like the I think it's called the 787. It's a composite body. It's much lighter, but it's kind of like a one-of-a-kind. You need to be able to stretch that process out where you can make composites and it be much more of an assembly line situation. Wichita State is working on that. If you get that to the point through aeronautical research that NASA is working on, so that we can start popping out airframes that are composites, then you've saved a lot of weight, and therefore you've saved a lot of fuel, and you've gotten a lot greater efficiencies. And according to the passengers that fly on the 787, it's also more comfortable inside because of the humidity.
seems like you agree with me that the private universities, the public and private universities, are of value to NASA and to the country in this regard.
Absolutely, and as a matter of fact, Senator Shaheen was here 12 years ago when we passed the new NASA bill on a track where there was going to be the government program and there was going to be a commercial program. And we're seeing the fruits of that, for example, going to and from the International Space Station today, because we are transporting crew by NASA contracting with SpaceX and eventually Boeing, and Boeing should launch its spacecraft, by the way, in a week or so. And this is a test flight, and then the crew would be later this year. So we'd have two ways of getting to the International Space Station, SpaceX and Boeing, and we've already got lots of ways to get cargo up there, including Northrop Grumman launching from Senator Van Hollen's constituency. It's actually right across the state line in Virginia, but most of the people live in Maryland that work there at Wallops Island launch facility. And so there's just so much that is happening in the commercial area, whether it's done directly under NASA's government contracts or whether NASA contracts with commercial entities in order to produce what we're asking them to produce. Now, when it comes to safety, NASA's all over it. We're not simply going to put up crew and spacecraft that are not safe, even though we've contracted with a commercial company. And the proof's in the pudding. Look what has happened with commercial crew going to and from the International Space Station.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and to the ranking member. Great to have both of you here. Administrator Nelson, thank you for your enthusiasm for all the initiatives that you're overseeing and for presenting a budget that includes important investments in space exploration and discovery, as well as robust funding for earth sciences, which you said are very important to all of us, and encompass many of the Maryland-based missions, including at Goddard, and appreciate the funding for PACE, for OSAM-1, and again, continuing support for the Webb telescope. We're all thrilled with the fact that that deployed successfully, and we all know a million things had to go right in order for that to be successful, and it has been. And I'm very proud of all the folks at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore who are responsible for mission operations for the Webb, as well as about 2,000 other Marylanders at Goddard and other places. And as you say, we all look forward to getting the first images back soon. Thank you for mentioning Wallops. I'm going to spend a moment focusing on the Wallops flight facility, which, as you indicated, is critical to our space and Earth science missions. It's a hub for unmanned flight. It's a supplier to the International Space Station. It's a home to NASA's balloon program. This is a great budget, but it does have a shortcoming in that it does not include the funds that we've traditionally provided to the 21st Century Launch Complex program. Other administrations have also admitted that, and we've worked on a bipartisan basis to make sure those funds are provided, because Wallops is attracting new commercial space partners. It's growing, and I think you've acknowledged as well in your infrastructure needs budget the importance of the Wallops Island Causeway Bridge. So I just want, Mr. Administrator, I know you've been there, just your commitment to work with us to make sure that that's a success.
Not only do you have my commitment, I've been out there, and we're afraid that bridge is going to fall in the water.
Yeah.
And it's the #1 priority, and I thought with machinations with some of your colleagues on this committee that we were going to get it in the '22 budget. Yeah. I may get in trouble by saying this, but I hope that there's going to be some kind of infrastructure bill that's still going to come out of the Senate that would allow us then to have high priority, desperately needed infrastructure projects like the Wallops Island Bridge be taken care of. The only way we got some of the others was that you all passed a hurricane emergency supplemental, and we got the roof being done down in New Orleans on the big facility down there. But we haven't been able to get that Wallops Bridge.
I hear you, Mr. Administrator. We'll work on that. I mean, the infrastructure modernization bill had a lot of good investments in it, but it did neglect some critical U.S. government investments, like this one. I mean, obviously, if you don't have a bridge going to the Wallops Space Complex, you're in a world of hurt. I do want to flag also the issue of bridge repair over the BW Parkway for Goddard. Mr. Administrator, let me ask you about heliophysics, because I indicated that I think the budget is a good one, but in the area of heliophysics, there is a slight reduction, which I will work with my colleagues to remedy, but I do want to applaud you for your continued support to the Science Directorate. If you look at the Heliophysics Division's budget, it's been reduced. I think that's a mistake, especially as we witness the impact of solar flares on Starlink satellites. And space weather, as you know, poses a serious risk to our satellites and communication systems. So I also believe you're committed to that mission. In my remaining time, Dr. Punch, if I could just thank you also for all your work at the National Science Foundation. Quantum science is obviously a critical area for our country, and you mention it in your remarks. And Maryland is an important center for quantum information science. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you're doing in that area? Yeah. And at the same time, talk a little bit more about your efforts to bring HBCUs into your efforts to make sure that all of our talent is on the playing field when it comes to science.
Thank you, Senator, for asking that question. It's as you pointed out, it's a very, very important technology, and it's very important that we stay in the vanguard of innovation. It turns out yesterday I was giving a talk at IBM Yorktown, and I was standing in front of the quantum computer right there and admiring the tremendous work that has gone into it in terms of many, many things, materials, devices, the fabrication technologies, of course, that goes with it, the quantum information science, and a whole lot more, and quantum networking. All of those things that have come together in order for us to be building such a fantastic machine. And I was told that it is deployed not only across the United States, but also will be deployed all across the globe. So we are really a world leader in this. From an NSF perspective, this investment has happened for several decades. We are here today because of the sustained investments that NSF has made in all aspects, whether it is physics, chemistry, material science, computing, engineering, and a whole lot more, over several decades to get to the point where we are right now. And I'm very thrilled to say that through a partnership with Department of Energy and other partners, we are continuing to invest in quantum institutes, which are these large-scale partnerships to be able to advance it at speed and scale, as I would often say. We also have a number of investments in terms of how we take these ideas to action in terms of entrepreneurial ventures and supporting industry partnerships, things of that nature, and that's why I was there at IBM yesterday. But as you said, the most important thing for us is to make sure that we have the quantum workforce. This is an exceedingly important imperative. Yes, we will have great quantum researchers, and we'll continue to invest in that. But we need to make sure that we have quantum inspiration starting not just at the university level, but right at the K-12 level. So we have a Q12 program, which essentially is focused on K-12 inspirations of quantum. How might we get quantum foundry-like ideas accessible for high school children to be able to, and middle school children, to be able to get excited about quantum science? How can we relate quantum futures at the K-12 level? So this is something that we are working with many partners to develop that kind of curriculum at the K-12 level. To your point about HBCUs, we have a program called Expand QISC, Quantum Information Science and Engineering. This is precisely the focus. How might we get the quantum futures also exciting people at HBCUs, at other MSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities? And so we're working diligently with our partners Specific to HBCUs, since we met last, Senator, I had many conversations with HBCU presidents and chancellors. And I'm thrilled to report that one of those presidents and chancellors is University of Maryland Eastern Shore President Anderson. And so had good conversations and asking them, how might we have more historically black colleges and universities? How might we have the minority serving institutions and R2 institutions also participating in the quantum revolution? We also need community colleges in this because it requires a lot of technical skills also to be part of how we build the quantum futures. So we're working on all of this in terms of STEM training for talent everywhere to be inspired by quantum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here today. Administrator Nelson, it's good to see you. About a week ago, I was pleased to be at a conference. I just missed you. You came, I think, the next day. But I was with a couple of your leaders, James Reuter and Thomas Zerbuchin, from the space technology and science areas. And the goal is to combine the skill and resources, both in people and capabilities, of West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania region to become more active contributors to the our space industrial base. Really exciting conference. I've seen this firsthand at Constellium in Ravenswood, which does a lot of the aluminum, and then also I toured the Astrobotic. I don't know if you got to do that while we were in Pittsburgh, which was exciting to see what they're going to be landing in the fourth quarter. So how do you see this perspective? I know you touched on it a bit with the question that I heard with Senator Moran. The private sector and even the more rural parts of our nation that can really capitalize on the exciting, I think, futures in space.
Specifically, that consortium of 3 states is responsible for 10,000 jobs in the 3 states. And it's impressive what you all have done. Also, while I was there, I did go to Astrobotic, and they revealed the first commercial lander on the moon. This will be, and it will be later this year, this will be the first U.S. landing on the moon since a half century ago when we last landed with Gene Cernan on Apollo 17. And this is going to be a commercial landing under the CLIPS program, of which we have incentivized the commercial industry to build landers and put scientific payloads on them, many of which are NASA payloads, and do all kinds of things without NASA having to do the lander. And so, for example, there are 3 companies that are going to be landing. One of those companies is going to have a NASA instrument on it. It will land on the South Pole. It'll dig down to see if the water that we know is there in the shadowed crevices on the South Pole, which is now ice, is there water underneath? And if so, then there's the potential for rocket fuel, hydrogen and oxygen. And so these are the kind of things that you're doing out there in combining efforts of 3 states, and it's only going to grow.
Yeah, it was really exciting to hear, not just private sector, but the higher ed, educational, and the nonprofit community. As you know, Pittsburgh has some really great community organizations from their long history of building this country that they've now sustaining and looking at space. Let me ask you one other question about the upcoming OSAM, used to be called Restore L, and because West Virginia's Robotic Technology Center is a part of that. That's the in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing of satellites. What do you think? How important is this? I mean, I can see it, if you could quantify a little bit.
Hugely important. If we are able to service a spacecraft on orbit, then we get extra life out of it. Not only repairs, maintenance, but also fueling.
Right.
And so it makes sense.
Right.
And we are developing, NASA's developing this capability. We've contracted out for commercial entities to do this as well. And by the way, before you get through, I just want to give kudos to you. You know, we have what we call the IV&V Center
Right.
in West Virginia, independent verification and validation of software.
Right.
That's so super important to NASA. And I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks, and I hope your schedule on a Monday morning works out so that you can come with us, and then I'll try to get you and whoever in the delegation is with us back to Washington.
Sounds great. That's named for our Katherine Johnson, as you know, one of our proud West Virginians. I was there for the dedication. I look forward to that, and I will be looking at my schedule. Thank you. I have a question for you, but I'll submit it for the record. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Senator. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, where I come from, which was running a business for 37 years prior to getting here, investment was always the most important thing you had to consider. When you invest, there's a return on it, and if you don't do it well in business or government, you end up paying the price. Your competitors generally outmaneuver you in the long run. When we're looking at both NASA, National Science Foundation, you might be surprised, but I think we ought to be putting as many resources into it as we can. It's one of the few things that, even though it may not be tangible, it's very important, and sometimes it is very tangible as well in terms of what it yields down the road. So I'm one that generally always thinks of the particulars, which I see $23.27 billion enacted fiscal year 21, 24.04, request 25. That's about as mild a request in terms of increases of anything I've seen since I've been here. It's in the context, though, that we're 30 trillion in debt. That's such a complicated subject. All I can tell you, it's not a great business plan to borrow your way into the future when a lot of it doesn't give you a true return on investment. I want to talk about, I think, what is even a more existential discussion, and that is our main geopolitical competitor. So, Dr. Panch, when it comes to the Chinese, they're not apologetic. They're not even quite about it. They would want to replace us someday and do it, I think, by merit, according to maybe what they might think that might be. But in the meantime, I've observed them as being ones that I don't know their handshake business partners. And if we do invest more in National Science Foundation or NASA, how are we sure that with their behavior, especially when you're maybe doing it to some extent where there's, even if it's not shared information, it could be extracted, how are we certain that we're going to do it in a way that keeps us secure and doesn't aid the competition? And then, Mr. Nelson, I'd like you to answer that same question as it would apply to NASA. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. I often say research security, research is research integrity. Research integrity is research security. So clearly we are, before I get to the specific question about China, we are working with international partners who share our values of research integrity, transparency, openness, and also reciprocity. So we are working with partners who emphasize that, and we are building those partnerships. So one of the things that NSF did 2 years ago, and I was at that time the National Science Board, is we commissioned a security group called Jason, and we asked them to look at the problem so that it is not just an internal thing only, but an external group of experts looking at it and giving us advice in terms of how do we move forward in research security. And we are pretty much following the guidelines that have been given to us by Jason, of course, in consultation with many other constituencies. One of the principal recommendations that was made was to appoint a chief officer for research, security, strategy, and policy, whose job it is to every day wake up and think about research security in its many forms to make sure that we are protecting those things that needs to be protected and set up the policies that needs to be set and put in place for that to be, exercised in its fullest form. And I'm very happy to say that that person reports directly to me, and that was part of the recommendation. But more importantly,
feel confident that in this case, especially with what we've observed over the last decade or so, especially more recently, that it will be foolproof, it will not be breached if we're making these investments, to where it would be nothing more than giving them information that would end up hurting us somehow in the long run.
Senator, this is where I think a partnership with agencies, and that's what we're working right now. NSF is closely partnering with this chief officer, with the intelligence agencies, with other agencies like NASA, with the Department of Energy, and all these agencies, because it's an all-of-government approach. In fact, NSF co-leads with the Office of Science Technology Policy, with the Department of Energy, and NIH, to make sure that the policies that we are putting in place is consistent across the board for all researchers in institutions that we essentially invest in. And so I can tell you that we have constant conversations about this. In fact, I will tell you, since we met last time, we have developed an analytics software that can actually look at where people are supposed to be declaring their conflicts of interest and things of that nature, or commitment, that they are surfaced, and we are able to then make sure that people are ensuring that they are declaring their conflicts as the case may be. But more importantly, the work happens in the institutions, academic institutions. So we are partnering with the academic institutions to make sure that the policies that we are putting in place are going to be, essentially implemented. But in terms of taking care of any breaches, we work very closely with the Office of Inspector General. As you know, it's an independent entity from NSF, and we make sure that we take care of any such situation.
Thank you, because it looks like you're well aware of the potential of what might happen. Mr. Nelson, would you weigh in?
Senator, your question about China, I have made no bones about, in response to Senator Shaheen, they are simply not transparent. They have not cooperated. We have given them ample opportunities, and I won't repeat what is already on the record for the committee. We would welcome that, but we would be very guarded in our dealings with the Chinese. But thus far, all the opportunities that we have given them, and the example that I gave was that life was threatened on the face of the earth with the uncontrolled entry of their first stage of their rocket when they put up their space station. Not only had they not saved enough fuel for a controlled reentry, and thank goodness it came down in the Indian Ocean, but it could have come down in Europe, and it could have come down in Saudi Arabia. And not only had they not done that, but they refused to give us coordinates and information about the track. We fortunately had our own information about the track, so we were pretty on top of it. But it's just another illustration. And it's such a contrast to what we've been doing with the Russians ever since the Soviet Union in 1975, where the civilian space program has always had a cooperation to this point now. And going forward, why this is such an international space program, where the Japanese and the European Space Agency and now the UAE are all participating with us, not only on the space station, but as we go to the moon and the Gateway, which is like a space station that will orbit the moon.
Well, thank you for being vigilant and alert to the potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. Senator Braun raised the issue of investing, and I agree. I think it's one of the reasons that I support the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, because I think that's a place where we are investing in science in a way that we really need to, science and innovation. And one of the provisions that is included in that I support requires that at least 20% of NSF investment go to EPSCoR states like New Hampshire. So, Dr. Punch, can you talk about why it's important for us to also encourage small states to participate in EPSCoR and to invest in those programs?
Madam Chair, thank you so much for that question. If you recall last year when I gave the testimony, I said talent and ideas are democratized all across our nation, no exception. I happen to come from one of the small states too, and therefore I fully understand that when you energize talent everywhere, I think innovation can happen anywhere. I always say innovation anywhere, opportunities everywhere, for which we need to energize talent everywhere. I've been deeply committed to this since I got in. In fact, my central pillar of my three-pillar vision is about ensuring inclusivity, access, and ensuring that we embrace diversity of all kinds, diversity of geography, socioeconomic demography, and racial diversity. So we need to make sure that talent everywhere is energized. So that's the first point that I want to lead off with. So if you look at some of the programs that NSF has launched, let's take the AI institutes or the quantum even programs. You will find, you'll be very pleased to know that AI institutes right now with just 2 rounds, with 16 institutes, spans 40 states and the District of Columbia. And a 3rd round that is coming in. And this is an intentional effort because I truly believe that AI is everywhere and AI should be everywhere. And quantum likewise should be inspired everywhere. So I think in terms of therefore, how do we get these ideas that we say that is everywhere to rise up? And that's why I talked about this new program that we launched, where if you look at institutions that truly deserve the level of investments with the fantastic ideas that is everywhere, one way of doing that is to make sure some of the institutions have the support, for the research infrastructure support that makes it possible for them to rise up and be successful in the gold standard merit review process of NSF. How do we get those institutions, other institutions also to play ball? And this is why the granted program is a virtual research infrastructure office. How do we get research development support? How do we get pre-award, post-award support? How do we get support in terms of how do we transact intellectual property? How do we build partnership with industry? This kind of a support that is not necessarily available in all institutions. How do we make that possible in historically black colleges, universities, in other MSIs, in states like the EPSCoR states, where there is a lot of talent and ideas that needs to be lifted up? So I'm a huge fan with the granted program to lift those ideas and make them successful. So I'm very, very comfortable with the fact that we have it as an aspirational goal of how we might invest in all these states, the EPSCoR states included, in a way that can bring out those talent and ideas.
And so you would agree then that helping to build that infrastructure also means ensuring that NSF's large-scale programs like science and technology centers, engineering research centers, mid-scale infrastructure, AI institutes, the new technology directorate, all of those should also encompass EPSCoR states.
Absolutely. In fact, I've made the point, in fact, publicly I've said this, that when institutions like R1 institutions lead and they bring in partnership other institutions, I've said that we should also look at R2 institutions and MSIs and HBCUs. Sometimes they should be the lead and R1 should be partner institutions. And so I'm fully in concert with the fact that all these institutes can be everywhere and should be everywhere because ideas are everywhere.
And does that 20% of NSF investment, is that a goal that allows us to do that?
So an aspirational goal, because if the granted program, as we have outlined it, which I am confident is going to be widely successful, you will find that we will end up over the years that we are essentially probably exceeding even that kind of investment that goes to the EPSCoR states and the regions of our nation where the investments are not as prominent right now. So as an aspirational goal, it's a good goal to have.
Well, thank you. I'm counting on Senator Moran as a conferee of the conference committee to hold tight on that 20% to go to EPSCoR states. Small EPSCoR states. So share that with Senator Moran since he's not here right now. Let me also ask you, Dr. Panch, about the number of additional grants that NSF would be able to fund if you are funded at the request level. What does that allow you to do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise? And how do you see that contributing to our goal of promoting innovation and competition?
Madam Chair, if you'll recall the last testimony that I gave, I talked about the numbers of grants and what we need and what we are leaving on the cutting room floor. I, in fact, invoked this when I was with Senator Moran in Kansas, when a question was asked from a faculty member who had gotten a competitive rating and said, but I did not get funded, right? So at NSF, we receive about 40,000 to 50,000 grants a year, grant proposals a year. Last year, for example, it's about 43,000 grant proposals. We fund about 11,000 of them, about 11,000 of them, at a 25% sort of a success rate, let us put it that way. Now, clearly, if you ask me, Punch, so what is the number of proposals that is recommended by the gold standard merit review process that NSF, is very well known for? It turns out it is close to about, 1/3 or 30% of the proposals. So clearly, we have a number of proposals that are ranked competitive that are left behind on the cutting room floor, right? So right now, with 25%, with the new investments that are being proposed, we will get to about 2,800 more proposals. Our success rate going from 25% to 26%. But I also talked about the size of our grants last time. I said average is about 200K. We need to work towards raising it to 300K. With this increase, we will get from 200K to 240K. We'll be part way there. We'll be 20% of the way there instead of the 50% that we desired. But that's a good trend to take to where we need to be in terms of how we should get this done. And I see this as a national security issue because the unfunded ideas and unfunded proposals are the ones that our competitors invest in. And we should not leave that in the cutting room floor. And so I'm hoping and I'm grateful for all of you for recognizing that. And I'm grateful to the President of the administration for investing in NSF because this would make that possible.
Thank you. Senator Moran is back, but while he's still getting settled.
Another question.
Yes.
That'd be great.
I will do that because I wanted to wait until you got back to follow up on your question to Administrator Nelson about the 2025 date because obviously it depends on a lot of things going right if we're going to make that 2025 date. And I was a little fuzzy on how confident you are that that can actually happen. So can you tell us today that if you get your budget request, that you will be able to make that 2025 date for the landing?
We will not fly astronauts until it's safe. And if that means there's a delay, then we will delay. But we have every reason to believe that we are on a schedule that, first of all, that Artemis will certainly, through the SLS rocket and the Orion spacecraft, be ready, and we will have flown in 2024 a crew after this first test flight later this year. We will have flown a crew in a 30-day mission in lunar orbit. And then we have every confidence to feel that under the contract with SpaceX, that in 2024, they will land an uncrewed lander as part of their demonstration, and that a year later, in 2025, that we will be ready for them to have launched their lander into lunar orbit. Orion goes into lunar orbit, the crew is transferred, and the lander goes down and lands and stays for whatever the prescribed time is, a day or so. And then they come back and rendezvous in lunar orbit with Orion and come home. Now, of course, we believe that that's the schedule. But I can just tell you that if I'm making the decisions, it's not going to fly until it's safe.
Well, I certainly think we would all expect no less than that.
Yes, ma'am.
That certainly needs to be the bottom line for the decision-making. My question is really, assuming that it is safe, are we going to meet all those other deadlines in order to ensure that it's safe and to get the landing done?
And I appreciate your question, and you ought to ask that question. It's also true that every space mission that we've had, there have been delays. You think back to Apollo. Look what happened after the Apollo 1 fire. I mean, they were down for over 2 years. And still, with an incredible amount of money poured in, we're able to make President Kennedy's goal of landing on the moon by the end of the decade. Look at the space shuttle. The space shuttle, a fantastic flying machine, by the way, that we now know had certain technical flaws, and we lost 14 souls. It too was delayed until 1981, when in fact a lot of people thought that it was going to fly not long after Apollo-Soyuz in '75 and fly in the late '70s. It didn't happen. And look what happened. When we lost Challenger, we were down 2.5 years. And then in 2003, we lost Columbia. And we were down another couple of years, and the further delays. So you can't go until it's right, and all these things cost money. These delays cost money. That's another reason we had a question here about competition. That's another reason to get to fixed price contracts and then hold them to it. And we are doing that with the landers for the moon.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Ponch, again, thank you for your presence here and your leadership at NSF. Let me begin by talking about the TIP directive. You mentioned in your testimony about the development of new directorate, and you did so with great excitement. The NSF budget proposes $880 million for the continued establishment of the TIP directorate, which is now about 20% of the total amount that's being requested for research. Is NSF balancing the creation of TIP directorate while preserving its basic research foundation, the bedrock of NSF's work, its mission? And should we be concerned that TIP will change direction of NSF and undermine that basic research needed to enable us to reach the goals of TIP?
Yeah. Very good question, Senator. Thank you for asking that question. So if you look at the TIP directorate, some of the programs in the TIP directorate, let's look at the SBIR STTR program, the Innovation Core, which is the entrepreneurship program, the Partnership for Innovation, which is also a program that was at NSF. Some of those programs that have been focused on the translation of science ideas into the market has been existent at NSF in terms of training the entrepreneurs of the future. What we're trying to do right now is to scale them, but on top of that, also build a program called the Regional Innovation Engines. And these Regional Innovation Engines, to be very clear, are meant to train the next generation, the future practitioners and future researchers also, in a fused environment of academia and industry working together. So it is about the mission of NSF, which is about training the STEM talent for the future, inspiring new ideas. So it is the same mission that we are working on. I often talk about the NSF's vision. When I came in, I started describing it this way. It's the DNA of NSF. The one strand of the DNA of NSF is curiosity-driven, discovery-based, exploratory research. And that's something that you alluded to, Senator. But we also at NSF have been doing the other strand, which is what I called use-inspired, solutions-focused translational research or innovations. To me, these are highly synergistic, like a DNA is. Explorations make possible translations, but translations make possible more explorations. There are many, many examples of this, including, for example, in space exploration. You start working on the technology for space exploration, you explore, you find new science, new problems to solve. And this synergy is exceedingly important, in fact, to open up new vistas of scientific explorations also. That's why this is an exceedingly important TIP directorate. I want to make sure it's not a distraction, it is an attraction. It's an attraction to do more in exploratory science rather than distracting away from exploration. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is it makes possible the kind of work that we need in states like Kansas. You and I saw this, Senator, firsthand. The unbelievable work and the talent that is there in the Johnson's Community College. Let's take that as an example. They're doing amazing work. They won the Community College Innovation Challenge when we were there. And when I met these students, it's very clear that if we don't have these crucibles of innovation, we won't have the community colleges, university, and other researchers getting the practitioner talent trained at the highest level of intensity for where we need to move forward in terms of the industries of the future. So I'm happy to elaborate more, but this is what we're trying to do.
Let me follow up with, in the absence of what research takes place at NSF, where would the private sector, in the absence of that research, where would we lose the most? What does the private sector do in comparison? Applied research versus basic research, where do we need to focus public funds?
Yeah. So the public funds, I think, is mostly focused, still in NSF, the majority of the public funds is focused and will continue to be focused on fundamental basic research. But as I said earlier, we are also trying to invest so that more fundamental research can be uncovered through the practitioner work that we do. But let's not forget, just in the last year, let's take some examples. In the AI institutes, in fact, the private sector has come to us and said, we will co-invest with you. Amazon invested in a fairness in AI program. One of the AI institute's scale funding of $20 million were invested by a combination of Intel, Google, Accenture, and Amazon. So private sector is coming to us and saying, we will co-invest with you because our basic research needs are something that NSF is well positioned to do. You have a gold standard merit review process. We can work with you to unearth more basic research that benefits all industries. So in fact, I would say it's an additive effect rather than a subtractive effect. So I'm finding more and more, yesterday I was in IBM. IBM is investing about $100 million on HBCU campuses to empower them. And we're talking about how we might collaborate with companies who have interest in wanting to get the talent of the future and also newer ideas that they want to work in. And they're willing to partner with NSF. This is a new world of partnership. So what we're also doing at the same time is to address your question in another way. I'm developing a strong partnership with the Department of Commerce so that their regional technology hubs and our regional innovation engines are tightly integrated. So the scientific prowess of what we have, which is what makes our nation unique, the innovation potential that is there, is able to be taken out and scaled, and that we are able to compete now with other nations who are starting to become more tight. So I want us to be a lot more tightly coupled between agencies, between the various programs, and nice handoffs, and we have fantastic partnership with NASA at so many levels. And that's what we need more of, and I'm a huge fan of that, because our nation, I think, needs all the public investments to then translate to economic prosperity, societal prosperity, and most importantly, every region of our nation and the ideas and talent lifted up there. And we saw firsthand what's happening in the great state of Kansas.
Senator, if I may, Dr. Punch has just described the emphasis on public-private partnership, the ethos that's very similar to what we are doing. It's a new day. Government can't do it all. You all give us an X amount of money, and we've got to make that money happen the way that we're trying to achieve. And we can leverage that money by working with the commercial industry and through competition bring those costs down to NASA. Give you one more example. The development of SpaceX and their very successful rocket, the Falcon 9 and the Falcon 9 Heavy. General Hyten, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, told me last year before he retired, he said the fact that we have competition now on going to space just for the military has saved them $40 billion in launch costs. So it's just another example of the public-private partnership. We're doing this with regard to climate, and of course I'll be happy to go into examples if you'd like that, senators.
Dr. Ponch, my questions are not intended to be critical, but to garner an understanding of how we can more rapidly advance the outcomes that we need economically and in national security in a time in which our adversaries have seemingly an adversary has unlimited public funds. How do we do this in a way that gets us to the places that we need to be the fastest?
Senator, I never looked at your question as a criticism at all. In fact, on the contrary, I looked at it as your expression of strong support. I'll tell you, to the point that you make about our competitors somehow, because they have a top-down approach, they seem to force the synergy. Forced synergies will not work. We all know that, at least not in the long term. That's what is fantastic about our nation. I repeat this slogan. I say innovation anywhere, opportunities everywhere. I'll keep saying this because we have that innovation potential anywhere, and that's why we need to bring that out by not forced synergies, by natural synergies of coming together, and that's what we're doing. How can we use the public funds in a way that inspires every talent and idea everywhere, but at the same time, how do we leverage, as Senator Nelson was saying, through public-private partnerships, scale even more and scale faster? I'm anxious to scale fast because I think we are so good, but we need to scale fast and use every bit of talent that we have in our nation.
Absolutely, the capabilities of the United States to advance faster, better, be safer, be more economically secure than our adversaries comes from the initiative, enterprise, innovation that comes from our private sector, that comes from private citizens. And government is a tool in which we can enhance and speed up that process. But I'll choose the innovator over the government decision every time.
You're right. I mean, innovation is everywhere, but we have a role. I often say, Senator, if I can say that, we have a role of catalyzing, enabling. As public investors, that's what we are doing. The innovation is there. All we are doing is we are trying to make it surface up. We don't want anybody to be left behind. I met unbelievable talent all across the nation. I'm traveling quite a bit, like Senator Administrator Nelson. I'm also traveling quite a bit around the nation, and I'm so inspired. Every time I go, I meet K-12 students, I meet our community college students, I meet our university students and entrepreneurs. I'm really inspired to do more, faster, better, as you said.
As we would say, I adopt the Dr. Pancha's last few paragraphs as my own remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me ask, in regard to the conference committee that is hopefully soon to meet, what is it that you hope to see occur in USICA or whatever the legislation ultimately is called that advances the cause at NSF?
Big, bold investments that takes all of the ideas that I talked about that is being left behind. And Senator, we saw a concrete example in our conversation at the Johnson's Community College. It's disheartening to see people who are putting a lot of effort to take their idea with so much hopes and aspirations and writing a fantastic proposal, submitting it to NSF and getting a gold standard merit review saying, yes, this is worthy of investment, and not having that idea flourish is a totally missed opportunity. Likewise, those ideas that needs to be, inspired everywhere that results in innovation ecosystems. For example, we talked about the states of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, just as one example. Where can be the crucible of the innovation for the future of agriculture, smart agriculture, than such crucibles of innovation that we can build all across our nation? And I was with John Deere the other day, just 2 weeks ago, in Illinois, visiting John Deere. And I'm looking at their technological roadmap. I'm looking at what they're doing. And I'm saying, wow, I never knew a tractor company has so much technology built into this with AI and computing and so on. And so I think that's what we need to do more, is to see how we can build these crucibles of innovation. And to do that, the proposals that's made in the USICA and Competes Acts, I think is the right strategy. The investment for this bold, rapid scaling of ideas and talent. And I'm really, really hopeful, and I'm very thankful to all of your support so that we will make this happen very soon, sooner than later, because we cannot miss any more time. This is the time. Yesterday, my talk at IBM was, time is now. This is the time. We need to accelerate our progress to stay far ahead of our competition, not even look behind.
Senator Shaheen, I'm down to no longer any questions, but just one comment, and that is to the NASA administrator. Senator Nelson, Earth-observing satellites are an essential tool for Kansas because it aids us in our agricultural practices, and that's a hugely important component of our state's economy. and your offer to educate me, show me, and demonstrate to Kansans and Americans the value of those Earth-observing satellites is very much appreciated, and I look forward to the moment in time in which we accomplish that.
Yes, sir. And indeed, a lot of people think of NASA as the space agency. Don't forget the first A, aeronautics. But also, people don't realize NASA is the point of the spear on climate and climate change, because all the measurements that are being made are done by instruments that we design, build, launch, and many of them we operate. And over the course of the next decade, we're going to have a great observatory of 5 additional major spacecraft that all of this information is going to be put into a 3D composite on precisely what is happening to the Earth's climate, what's happening to the water, to the land, to the ice, to the atmosphere. We're putting up at the end of this year a mission that is going to be able to measure for the first time the elevation of the streams and rivers and lakes, the fresh water. We've been able to measure the elevation of the oceans, the salt water. We are going to be able to find out very precisely what is happening to the ice. And all of this, and we have the support of the White House on this, and we hope we will have your support. We are going to create, if you can envision, in space terms, a mission control center. It's going to be called the Earth Information Center. It's going to bring all of this data in, and it's going to be displayed, and it's going to be available to everybody, not just government at all levels, including your local county commission, when they're planning their land planning, but it's going to be available to schools and universities and the private sector as well as to what is happening and the changes that are happening to the climate.
Rainfall may be the most common topic of conversation among my constituents on most days.
And Senator, I just want to say on Dr. Ponch's testimony, we did not collaborate on our testimony. But I feel like I could start a sentence and he could finish it and vice versa. And what he said, big, bold investments. And that's equally applicable to NASA.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that. I do have a few more questions, actually, before we close the hearing. And I share your enthusiasm, Administrator Nelson, for this budget. But I will admit I have a couple of concerns. One is the one that Senator Van Hollen raised about heliophysics, and that's based on a parochial concern because the cut has the potential to impact the University of New Hampshire, which is one of our nation's premier heliophysics institution, but also because one of the things that heliophysics does, as you know, is helps us to understand how our sun impacts the solar system, and part of that is what happens with climate change, as you were so eloquent about, and also our weather. And I appreciate NASA's establishing the space weather as its own program, but I wonder if you could help me understand why the request cuts space weather more than 12%, and what activities are proposed to be terminated. And one of the things that I always remember is one of the reasons we were not successful back when we were trying to get the Iran hostages out was because we didn't accurately understand what the weather was going to be when we landed those helicopters. And we saw the same thing happen when we went to get Osama bin Laden. The weather almost undermined that mission as well. So it's not just about our crops and what we need to do, but there are also significant national security implications for understanding what's happening with our weather. So help me understand why the cut and how the decision to reduce funding for heliophysics was made.
I do have, in my previous life, some credentials in this area because there's an instrument up there called Discover. It was terminated in politics in a previous administration because it had been proposed by a former vice president of the United States.
Yes, I remember that.
And yours truly had the opportunity to get some more. Fortunately, NASA had the good sense to keep it in mothballs. And then, lo and behold, the Department of Defense had a reason for wanting to get it up, to give us a quick alert on a solar explosion and all that radiation. And so it's out there 1 million miles. It's now called Discover, and it warns us of the solar radiation that's coming so that we can safe our satellites as well as our ground stations when that solar explosion is coming at us. University of New Hampshire, you're right, is a leader in the field of heliophysics. The decrease in the space weather program, which was $2.7 million, or as you stated, 12%, is due to a ramp down in the spending on space weather monitoring on an instrument called Hermes, which stands for Heliophysics Environmental and Radiation Measurement Experiment Suite. And it will complete its integration and test this coming December. Now, there were a bunch of things going on in science. This was the decision, since every now and then we get arbitrary amounts that are handed to us. And scientific decisions had to be made. But there's also a truth that the president proposes and the Congress disposes.
Okay, I appreciate that response. The other concern that I want to raise is a report from the GAO, because at the direction of this committee, the Government Accountability Office analyzes the cost and schedule performance of major NASA projects. And this is not, I don't think this is a problem of your leadership or even your predecessor's leadership. It's a long-term problem at NASA. What the GAO found was that NASA projects are experiencing the largest collective cost and schedule overruns since they began reporting in 2009. The overruns can't be attributed to COVID alone. Many projects had late-stage design changes that led to costly modifications and schedule slippage, and the collective budget pressure is delaying launch dates and squeezing out newer projects. So can you help us understand what you're working on to improve this project management, and what do you see improvement anytime soon in our ability to manage those big projects?
Madam Chair, there better be. And you're exactly right. There is no excuse for cost overruns. But the old way of doing things was always cost plus. And because of the competition that we've been talking about, we have been moving to the fixed price where we can under procurement law. In those that we can't do cost plus, we are moving to really crack down on them. I want to give you an example. Because Bechtel underbid on a cost-plus contract in order to what appears to get it on the next mobile launcher for the larger version of the SLS. The larger version has enhanced upper stage that will carry more payload, including the Gateway, which is like the mini space station that will be in lunar orbit. And they underbid it, and then they couldn't perform. And NASA is stuck. And what I have done is I have called in the CEO of Bechtel, who, by the way, is the grandson of the founder. His name is Bechtel. And they have readily acknowledged it, but there's no way under the contract, since it's a cost-plus contract, that we can do anything but eat it. And that's not right. And times are a-changing. And so what I've done specifically, other than jawboning and giving a lecture to all of our managers about tightening up on all of this, and particularly going forward, I have specifically named the Deputy Administrator, Colonel Pam Melroy, an astronaut commander, to serve as the agency's Chief Acquisition Officer to elevate the importance of acquisition. We are working closely with GAO and our Inspector General at NASA on the recommendations. I think we are beginning to make some progress in closing out the GAO recommendations related to strengthening this acquisition process. We are committed to improving our management of our cost and our schedule commitments. And I've also established a new Chief Program Management Officer dedicated to strengthening NASA's oversight of its enterprise, of its management, and of its program management policies. Under the law, that's what I can do. And going forward, if we take this competition seriously, we're going to be able to do a lot more cost-plus contracts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that explanation, and it sounds like progress. Obviously, we will want to continue to stay in touch with what you're seeing and what we can do to be helpful as you look at whether you need any new authorities to address what's happening. My final question, Dr. Panch, is for you, because in addition to space, which is really a new frontier, not just for research, unfortunately, for our security, so is the Arctic. Yes. A new frontier, yes. Both for research and for our national security. Yes. And as we look at the inroads that some of our competitors are making in the Arctic, it raises serious concerns about what we should be doing there. So can you describe NSF's plans for expanding Arctic research and how you see that rolling out?
Senator, thank you so much for your interest. Clearly, Arctic and Antarctic are of great interest to NSF, and we have a lot of work that we invest in both the Arctic and Antarctic. As you know, in the Arctic case, we also look at the North Atlantic as a huge partnership, not only what we do within the nation, but also with our partners in Europe, Canada, and others. So this is critical for economic as well as security and making sure that we are building resilience into the future. And so one of the things that we are doing is, you would be happy to know that we are working closely with the Arctic communities, because we need to make sure that we are including them in the conversations And so increasingly, NSF is very sensitive to the idea of making sure that our Arctic colleagues living in the Arctic are party to conversations, and that we are, and that's why you will find that we are taking a social behavioral, not just a scientific approach only, a social behavioral humanistic approach in terms of how we are devising the future for the Arctic. So clearly, this is an investment area that NSF has always made, and we plan to continue to do that. And I'm very pleased to say that it is not just in a few states. It's in many states across the nation participate in this, all the way ranging from Alaska to New Hampshire. And so we expect that this will continue into the future, and that's the way I see it.
Well, good. Thank you very much. Are you all set, Senator Moran? Let me just point out that if there are no further questions, senators have until May 10th to submit additional questions to the subcommittee's official hearing record, and we request that NASA and NSF respond within 30 days to any questions that you might receive. This was a very informative hearing. It feels like our science future is in good hands, and we very much appreciate the work that both of you are doing and look forward to continuing to collaborate and cooperate with your efforts. At this point, the subcommittee stands in recess until Wednesday, May 11th at 2 p.m., when we will hold a hearing on the budget request of the Department of Commerce. Thank you both.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Moran.